My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And every time it becomes a newer nerd and geek culture, we have to keep up us old fogies as well.
This seems like this is like the perfect episode to bring in my old buddy Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I don't think he wants to come to this episode. So,
because of disappointment, or because you don't feel like doing a voice for too long?
Mostly because I finally listened back to our Moon Knight episode, and I'm like, it was pretty cringy. I apologize to everyone who had to suffer through that. I mean, even when I was trying to do the voice, most of what I was saying just sounded like my normal voice anyway. So I will not bring out Obi-Wan for this. I know people might have been worried about that.
That you'd just be, hello there, and keep going. I mean, look, Obi-Wan is not the worst thing you've ever done in your life, I'm sure.
You know, you're probably right about that. We should also just acknowledge the fact that there was no new episode last week. People might be wondering, hey, what happened to you guys? Some
Ribs was in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so we ran into some connection issues, and after my experience doing the Christmas Carol episode by myself, I've just come to realize that I am not designed to be a solo podcaster. So at this point, this isn't a full-time job for either of us. We're not losing any money by not putting out content. So yeah, apologies to anybody who was really excited to hear the Obi-Wan episode last week. And this gave you more time to watch all of Obi-Wan Kenobi if you're the kind of person who likes to watch the shows before hearing us talk about it.
Yeah, and if you're the kind of person who is called Beef Pork Ribs and decided he was going to watch the 3 prequel movies before watching the Obi-Wan show, you may have not gotten to it.
So yes, there's a lot of history with this series, and I want to say I was asking for this show long before it was actually a thing. In fact, going back to July 2018, so 4 years ago, we actually did an episode of the podcast with my brother Dan Hatton. We were actually talking about Deadpool 2, but we talked about the trailer for the Christopher Robin movie, which had Ewan McGregor in it. And I remember commenting on the fact that, Star Wars is owned by Disney and this is being made by Disney. So if Ewan McGregor has a good experience with this movie, maybe, he'll be incentivized to come back for an Obi-Wan thing. And we were both talking about he's aging up perfectly to play, a version of Obi-Wan closer to what he looked like in the original movies.
I think Ewan McGregor is a great actor.
Yeah, I love Ewan McGregor.
You're right, but it also kind of messes with my head because, I feel like the Star Wars movies weren't that long ago.
You mean the prequels?
The prequels, yeah. And then I see him, I'm like, you're old now, or you're getting there. I can see it. He could probably play, if they ever did a prequel to another prequel, he could play Obi-Wan Kenobi, but closer to a New Hope age. He's getting there.
Well, so that's actually one of the reasons I'm excited about this movie. I'm hoping that if this goes well, it'll continue to build the rapport between Ewan McGregor and Disney, because that a Kenobi spinoff has been one of the things they've talked about. It's been rumored forever that they just haven't just officially announced
Seems like
it.
a little bit of a stretch, but I see what you're saying.
What do you mean, like what do you mean? What?
I don't see. I don't know. I just don't see it being.
You don't see it as
oh, he did great. Start running the writing for that Kenobi film.
Well, I mean, and not so that Disney will approve of him being in it. It's more so that if he's had a good experience working with Disney, and he'll be like, okay, well, I'll work with him again. I'm thinking more so for his buy-in.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on does he still have a bad taste in his mouth?
I don't think so.
Star Wars movies. I don't know.
From what I've seen of him being interviewed and stuff, it doesn't seem like he is as bitter or as.
But he was a big Star Wars fan growing up, was he not? Like his uncle was in.
That's right. His uncle played Wedge.
His whole mindset was like, yeah, I'll be in these movies. So maybe I don't know. I'm not Ewan McGregor. I haven't really listened to him in any interviews. So.
Yeah, bridge the difference, because that is something also that Ewan McGregor was very intentional about. Was like, he talked about it quite a lot in interviews, that he was trying to play a younger Sir Alec Guinness, right? Like, he wanted Obi-Wan, especially for like episode 2 and 3, to feel like a younger version of that character. Like, because that is the reason why the hello there was kind of important to him, right? It was, yeah, partially because that is, is it the first line that, like, other than screaming in Tusken, I think that's the first thing that Obi-Wan actually says, right?
That's correct, yes. Hello there is the first thing that Alec Guinness says as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
And I think he wasn't speaking in Tusken. I think he was doing the noise of that crate dragon thing.
Okay.
That creature we finally see realized in The Mandalorian.
Yeah. That makes more sense, actually.
I don't know why, but even like when I remember watching the original movies, Obi-Wan Kenobi was like one of my favorite characters, even as like the old man version. And then in the prequels, yeah, Obi-Wan was my favorite character. So maybe because he was just like a stand-up guy, like he was the Jedi who was like an example of a Jedi who, you know, he wasn't as rebellious as Qui-Gon or Anakin or Luke. He seemed like the guy who was more so.
He managed also to strike that balance of not being like a lot of people like Yoda, but Yoda was very unrelatable, and Mace Windu was, you know, it was really cool in the couple episodes of the Tartarovsky comic he was in, but it didn't feel like Samuel L. Jackson much. It was kind of a weird thing, but like, and I know a lot of people, probably because of Clone Wars and the EU, like a lot of other Jedis, but I feel like people like me who just watch the movies, Obi-Wan is the best Jedi in the movies, right? And he is a very good central focus. And I know that like through the years, a lot of people have talked about, you know, fixing the prequels, and a lot of people say that making Obi-Wan Kenobi the main character was the best way to do it, so that instead of trying to juggle as many storylines, you would have one central focus. And I think that also was what made a lot of people excited, and I think Ewan McGregor first of all to do Obi-Wan, right? Like he also really wanted to reprise the role, from what I can remember and gather from interviews. I could be completely wrong, but like there was a lot. I feel like, you know, when the Solo movie came out and people were like, "Oh, we don't really want an origin for Han Solo. He's an archetype. He doesn't need that." They were already talking about making the Obi-Wan movie, which I'm guessing this is what this became, but there were a lot of people who were excited about Obi-Wan getting another movie, getting something more, being on the screen again. So I think it's a pretty common thing that Obi-Wan was, you know, a lot of people's favorite character.
So yeah, let's get into the Secret Origins segment here. In 2013, so less than a year after Lucasfilm was purchased by Disney, Bob Iger, who was in charge of Disney at the time, announced they were making several Star Wars standalone spin-off films. and people were like, yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi should get a movie, because regardless of how you feel about the Star Wars prequels, I don't think I've heard anyone really say anything negative about Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. They're like, he's like the one thing about the prequels everyone can agree was good.
Yeah. I can't remember, was this before or after they had officially announced that the EU was being hacked?
This was after that, because that announcement came in 2012, like right after, because they announced the new trilogy like pretty much immediately after they announced the purchase.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's just because I do know that part of why some people were excited was because, like, very much the the EU had quite a good story for Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I think that even after they announced that it wasn't canon, there were still people who were excited, because like there were still people who thought that Kylo Ren would still be a character from the books, because there was a son of Leia and Han Solo who turned to the dark side. And I think there was a similar thing with like Obi-Wan. They were like, well, it won't be exactly the same thing, but they might inspire themselves from it. And a lot of people liked a lot of the stories about, and a couple of comics too, about what had happened to Obi-Wan in between, Order 66, or coming to Tatooine, and when Luke would grow up.
Yeah, definitely. There's that 19-year period between the two movie series. It's a great place.
And also, sorry, I think like the last thing is, I think at that point, because it's only the last season of not Rebels. Was it Rebels, or was it the last season of Clone Wars that kind of went into that?
Oh, the last season of Clone Wars is still.
It is set. Still, yeah. Okay, so it was right Rebels, because Rebels did have a little bit of Obi-Wan afterwards, because it has his final, his final duel with
Maul.
Yeah, with Maul and a couple other things. But that came after the announcement for this movie was out, right?
So they never officially announced that they were making an Obi-Wan movie. There's just lots of news articles and stuff that suggest they were. There's articles that suggest that they were working on it. Like they never publicly announced, we're making Obi-Wan a Star Wars story. Like that was what the rumors were. But after Solo came out and basically tanked at the box office, basically Lucasfilm kind of backed away from all spin-off films. And we've talked about on the show why Solo didn't work. I think that was the wrong lesson to learn from Solo, is that, people don't want to see Star Wars spin-off Solo movies.
They just didn't want a Han Solo movie, and especially one the way that they made it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can assume by late 2018, also like the reality of Disney Plus was coming down the line, and then maybe they realized that, there are things that we want to develop as films that would make for good, streaming shows instead.
Yeah, and I think also there was an aspect of it that just streaming shows are becoming more popular and are working out more and more, more than they used to. And I think even, since the pandemic, there's definitely been a bit of an increase in that. But even before that, there was still like, the idea that Game of Thrones was the last primetime TV and everything else is streaming now, that was kind of something people had started talking about by then. And so the idea of making, I think, a TV show instead of a movie was being more appealing in that sense too.
Yeah, we'll get into whether this should have been a movie or not, but it was announced in August 2019 at Disney's D23 fan event that Ewan McGregor would reprise the role as Obi-Wan Kenobi for a new series set for Disney Plus. They didn't announce a release date for it, but that was when this became an official thing, and I was pretty excited. I was like, yes, this is everything I've been waiting for. It just works out so well. It has, it's been, at that point, it had been almost 15 years since the release of the prequels, and Ewan McGregor, he actually has aged very well. Like, he actually doesn't look that much older than he did 15
Yeah,
years ago.
oh man, I watched an interview that he did with Hayden Christensen, and it was like, wow, you could almost think that Hayden Christensen was the older one in that interview. Like, if you
Yeah.
didn't know and somebody told you, I'd be like, yeah, no, I can believe that.
So
And that's like no offense to Hayden Christensen. It's just, he did age since he's been Anakin, and Ewan McGregor just doesn't seem to have much.
Yeah. So filming was scheduled to begin in July 2020, but then obviously with the pandemic, that was delayed until March 2021, and then it's finally coming out in 2022. Now, something you might not know, Beeper, is that the writer for the series basically changed partway through production, and the series was entirely rewritten.
Oh, I mean, knowing Disney and the way they've done things recently, that's not overly surprising.
Yeah, apparently the original scripts focused almost entirely on Obi-Wan looking over, like basically watching out for Luke on Tatooine and protecting him from whatever different threats, and people felt that it was too similar. I say people, specific people at Lucasfilm felt it was too similar to The Mandalorian.
I mean, I get that, but at the same time, then why did you make The Mandalorian about a dad protecting a kid? Like, I think it depends on how you do it. I think that very much depends on the approach you would have taken with the show, and I think there's a lot of different ways to make it not the same as The Mandalorian. But I can also understand theoretically why that decision was taken.
Yeah, there's all kinds of, again, none of this is confirmed, but there's like rumors that like Darth Maul had a role in the series, and it involved more threats coming to Tatooine than like what the series ended up being. Apparently, also after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, Lucasfilm has put a more concerted effort into like reviewing scripts for different projects they're working on.
I mean, again, I don't know if that's necessarily the lesson to take from that movie. Like, The Rise of Skywalker was a mess before it got into production, Like, again, so I recently rewatched the prequels, right? And I think very much one of the issues is that, one of the issues with the sequel trilogy is that, it did not have cohesive thought put into it. And that isn't like, I get it, but it isn't like because of the writers for the last movie, right? It's because of the three movies not having been made together, being kind of a mess together. And the other issue is that the other reason I'm actually not surprised about this is that, I don't know, there were a lot of, I didn't watch it, but I watched a few reviews and I read the episode synopses in preparation. It feels like something that wasn't fully developed over a long time. Like, it feels like something that was rewritten, and it wasn't just, because it doesn't feel like something that was years in the making and in careful preparation. Like, not to say it sounds like it was bad quality, but that the overall concept seemed a little put together and a little put together in a way to appeal more directly to, like, almost too directly to a modern audience. And I don't know if that might just be a prejudice or a bias from people that I heard talk about it, but it is kind of a problem a lot of movies are hitting these days that are set in a universe that has been built, but then you're kind of like The Mandalorian has similar problems, that they're kind of changing the Star Wars universe to make it apply more directly to the modern world, and there's a time and a place for that, but Star Wars is, more fantasy than sci-fi, and fantasy worlds tend to work better as analogies that are less direct, because then they can apply to more concepts.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, you yourself have not actually seen any of Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I have not.
And was that just because of a lack of interest on your part?
It was mostly a lack of time and other things happening in my life, and like I said, Mjolnir and I said, "Oh yeah, we'll just watch all the things that came before," and we just finished that yesterday, and I kind of realized a little late that was what we were doing. So,
okay, that's good to know, because
Yeah.
I'm going to be spoiling things for you here.
oh, I am fully aware. I come to this podcast knowing things will be spoiled if I don't watch them, but I've come to care less and less about spoilers, and I'm still gonna watch it, right? Like there were some things that I know before I was like, okay, because of whatever Joe said, I will or I won't. Usually will, because you're pretty positive and enthusiastic guy, but this one is one that I have to see this.
So I think the biggest example of something that changed in the rewriting of the show is that Darth Vader became part of the show in the rewrites. And he has a significant role in the show. Like, he's in at least 3 of the 6 episodes.
Like, I understand part of it, and it does sound like Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor wanted to work together and enjoyed that. But there's also this kind of like... It kind of had the reverse problem the Clone Wars has sometimes, like the animated series, where sometimes there were some things that they did on purpose to match with the movie, like the fact that Grievous and Anakin never meet, so that line in episode 3 makes sense when they're rescuing Palpatine, that they're that it is their first meeting, and so I feel like it almost was the reverse of that, where like it's pretty clear that Obi-Wan and Vader haven't had any interaction, and that, like, depending on the source, whether it's because Palpatine or Obi-Wan or even Yoda is shielding, Vader's vision. He has no idea about his son, about his children, about any of that. But I don't know. It feels like having him be an important part of the show might just be, a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a line of dialogue in A New Hope where he says, "When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master."
Yeah, and even the prequels are a little iffy about that, especially with, like, the last scene they talk before Mustafar, where Obi-Wan is like, "You've become a better Jedi than I could ever be," and they have kind of this, like, we are somewhat equals, and even in the duel on Mustafar, there's a lot of, like, I thought you were going to help, I thought you were going to be I thought you were the chosen one, you were supposed to bring balance to the Force. There's a lot of it is very much more of a friend talking to a friend than a master to his apprentice.
All right, well, before we get any further into this, based on your general knowledge of this, give us a Blu-ray case description for Obi-Wan Kenobi.
The fight is done. We lost.
Stay hidden.
Jedi cannot help what they are. Their compassion leaves a trail. Where is he?
In a world where Order 66 was executed.
Order 66.
Yeah, I can do voice. Obi-Wan Kenobi is living on Tatooine and watching over Luke, but things are not well, and people are trying to get to the children, and therefore he must protect the children against Riva, a person sent by the Empire, I think. Oh no, the Inquisition, to find the children and take them away. Will he be able to handle it? Will Darth Vader find his children? Or will people simply get along?
People do not get along.
Yeah, I know, but there is an aspect of that where they're trying to, maybe.
So I am so conflicted with this show because it's like I wanted Ewan McGregor to come back as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah.
And there are things that happen in this show that I think are amazing and are beautiful.
And are very much what you wanted from Obi-Wan Kenobi coming back.
But at the same time, like, it is funny to hear that Lucasfilm's put more effort into reviewing scripts and that the show is basically entirely rewritten. Because there are also a fair number of like head scratching things, like even just with the plot, like, and I don't know why Lucasfilm does this. You know, there's this 19-year period of Star Wars history that they continually choose to revisit, and every time they go back to it, the amount of lore they have to work around to not contradict themselves is getting even more intense. Like the period of the Empire's history. Even in the time since Disney bought Lucasfilm, you have Star Wars Rebels, Rogue One, The Bad Batch, the Fallen Order video games, the Solo movie, and now this, that are all meant to occupy that same, that same span of history.
But they all feel like a different,
Well, some of the different things.
And also like even flashbacks from the sequel movies have that kind of issue. Where they start saying things about the Empire that are like, really? Was that what it was like? Because like the First Order has a lot of like, we are the new Empire and we're doing this like the Empire. And it's like, are you though? Are you really?
And then there's the Andor show that's coming out in August. That's also going to be set during this period in time.
Yeah, if you can allow me a hot take.
Yes, let's get into the spice.
It's not Lucasfilm, it's Disney. Because this is exactly the same problem that Marvel is hitting with the multiverse. And I don't think, again, wrong lessons being learned. I don't think it's an issue of not reviewing the scripts. It's an issue of not having a team sit down, create a cohesive vision, and then inform writers of what it is. And also, to that effect, way too many people changing their minds and trying to make things more relevant or more appealing now rather than sticking to what they were going to do. Because there is some of that in Marvel. There's a lot of that in like almost everything, except maybe The Boys, that people are like, well, except The Boys is supposed to be talking about modern issues. So like, but I just feel like there's a lot of things that are just, they haven't established a clear vision at the get-go. And so it doesn't really matter how much they rewrite things because they don't know what they're doing. Right? And I feel like, definitely, like I could talk about the issues that Marvel has right now with trying to create a multiverse and not really understanding what a multiverse is and what, alternate realities and all that. And it seems like there's a little bit of that problem going on with Star Wars differently, but with what is the actual history of what's happening? Because it's not just the shows set during the time of the Empire. There are also issues with the show, like the shows set in the period after the Empire and trying to be coherent with the movies, because The Mandalorian also has a couple of weird things that don't really make a whole lot of sense with, what's been established in the canon of the movies and what's kind of being worked at in other movies too, or other, not movies, but other properties. And I think that's, more of a Disney problem and maybe more of a modern cinema problem if you want to extend it that far. But I don't think we need to discuss that issue. But I do think that Disney is definitely having a little bit of issue trying to be cohesive in what they're doing and trying to have more of an artistic vision than a political vision.
Maybe you're right. Who can say? But
I could be overanalyzing things. I do that.
Yes, you do. But you could also be right. And I'm like, who are they trying? Okay, here's an example of something that bothered me when I was watching Obi-Wan. The Grand Inquisitor is a character in this show.
Mm-hmm.
This
Who
is a character
in Rebels, right?
He was the main villain in the first season of Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah.
And then he's also in the Fallen Order video game. Now, in Star Wars Rebels, he's voiced by Jason Isaacs.
Mm-hmm.
Do you by chance know who Jason Isaacs is?
The name rings a bell.
He is the actor who played Lucius Malfoy.
Oh, okay.
In the Harry Potter movies.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. He's got a good voice for being a villain.
They chose to recast the character for Obi-Wan Kenobi. That some actor named Rupert Friend, who I'd never heard of before, ended up playing the part. And I'm like, I get it. When Ahsoka came into live action, like Ashley Eckstein, who has always been the voice of Ahsoka, hasn't really done any acting outside of Ahsoka. So it made sense that when you're going to bring that character in live action, you would cast an actress who's more well-known to play the part.
Yeah.
But arguably, Jason Isaacs is more well-known, at least in the general populace, than this Rupert Friend guy.
Well, and also I feel like, I don't know, if you're going to keep, I don't know. Look, I haven't seen or listened to his voice work, but I feel like he would sound a little older than this guy. As I've Googled Rupert Friend and see what he looks like and don't recognize him. It does seem like he's in a different age category than Lucius Malfoy. So I'm not sure if, I don't know.
My other complaint.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this gets into like who is this being made for? Because again, Star Wars Rebels is a show that ran for like 5 years, from like 2014 to 2019, right? So like,
yeah,
fans of that show would be like kids who watched at the time, parents of kids who watched it with them, and then people like me who discovered it once it was on Disney Plus.
Yeah. Especially people who watched it after they realized that Clone Wars was on Disney Plus, and people were like, "Oh, this is like Clone Wars," and they're like, "Oh, great."
When I'm all over the place here. I'm getting to a point when when I was watching The Mandalorian, I had roommates who had never seen any of the animated stuff. So when characters from the animated series appear in the live action show, like, whoa, like who is this? I've never heard of them before. And I'm like, me having seen more of the, animated stuff, I'm like, well, that's obviously this person. And so it's like, who are these shows being made for? Because arguably, just the very fact that they chose to recast the Grand Inquisitor tells me like they're not making this show for fans of Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah, and that might also be into the issue if they don't know who they're like. If they're trying to appeal to the general public rather than a specific person or a specific group or fans, then you do run into problems. And not just because fans can be prejudiced against things, like, yes, it happens, but if you do nothing for the fans but you still have like fan characters, like that's when you start getting into this is probably not the best analogy, but also, have we ever done an episode on Dragon Ball Evolution?
No.
Okay.
Not yet.
Well, there's this movie called Dragon Ball Evolution, which is a Dragon Ball Z movie, which has this really similar weird thing where there's too much Dragon Ball Z lore in this movie for people who aren't fans to understand what's going on, but there's not enough for the fans of the show to actually be happy, and there's too many changes from the show for the fans to actually be happy. And I feel like from what you're describing and what I was looking at, there is kind of that problem with Obi-Wan is that they're putting things that you need to have seen probably some of the animated shows or played some of the video games or know, the lore beyond the movies, beyond the mainstream, to be able to understand it. But you're changing so many things and adding new characters that you're trying to make more important and trying to, incorporate into the story that are new and that are a change from other characters that existed and already kind of held those roles, so nobody's happy.
Okay, this is a mild spoiler, but here's where my point is coming across. So,
yeah,
the Grand Inquisitor is in the first 2 episodes, and he's with Reva, who's one of the Inquisitors, and you can tell that Reva doesn't like him. You can tell that she wants to catch Obi-Wan Kenobi. She wants to become the Grand Inquisitor herself. At the end of the 2nd episode, Reva stabs the Grand Inquisitor, seemingly killing him. And I'm sitting at home going, okay, they're telling us this is set 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, which means we're still 9 years out from A New Hope. Star Wars Rebels begins 5 years before A New Hope. So, and he's around for the entire first season. Like, the Grand Inquisitor is killed in Rebels at the end of the first season. So I'm like...
Clearly what they're telling us is that Reva, after Obi-Wan, is also going to get stabbed by Lucius Malfoy, and he will become the new Grand Inquisitor.
But you know what I mean? It's like, that's a moment where I'm like, if you're a fan of Rebels, this means, like, the character doesn't die here because he is meant to live on into, being a part of this show that's set like 5 years from now in the universe. And sure enough, before the show is over, he comes back, and it's never really explained how he survived getting stabbed with a lightsaber. Well,
I mean, look, if Darth Maul can survive being cut in half by a lightsaber, do we really need, that eternal point Samuel L. Jackson makes every time he talks about coming back as Mace Windu is like, you never see him die. And people in Star Wars have survived far worse things.
Then it just makes Qui-Gon look like a punk for dying after getting stabbed.
Yeah, it kind of does, eh?
But you know what I mean? It's like, that's a little thing where it's like, that's a sloppy writing thing. Like, don't give us a fake out of this character being killed if we're led to, if you're trying to appeal to fans of the lore outside of just the movies.
And but also, like, unless he was set up very well in those 2 episodes, it feels like that kind of death wouldn't be very impactful. And again, comes back to the problem. It seems like it has a lot more to do with
Reva?
Reva's character than his.
It totally does. He's
right?
He's used for her character growth.
Yeah, he's being fridged for her sake. Or reverse fridged, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, in this show, the Grand Inquisitor exists essentially to advance Reva's story. So, like, if you add up the runtime for all 6 episodes of Obi-Wan, it's like 4.5 hours of content.
Okay.
And I guess there's somebody on the internet who took all that and basically trimmed it down to 1 2-hour movie.
Yeah, as people are wont to do these days.
And I would love to actually kind of sit down and watch that, because while I did enjoy the show, there definitely was a lot of, I don't want to say fluff, but there was a lot of moments of like atmosphere, like a lot of time spent like seeing people like walk through spaces or, building tension for the sake of building tension, or just, yeah.
And that's the thing about, every time we ask, could it have been a movie? Are those moments building character? Or are they just there to be there? Because, I think, like... Because I think part of, like, when we talked about Moon Knight, Some of the yes, Moon Knight could have possibly been just a TV show. Just a movie. But I feel we would have lost a lot of the interaction between the different personalities, and that was something that the show was definitely intentionally putting a lot of effort into. So, if those moments of relaxation, of walking around, of maybe subtle conversation, if there was a lot of, which it sounds like it doesn't from what you said, and
it really
didn't. If it didn't
depends.
have a lot of world building or character building, then yeah, definitely, I think it could have been a movie. And that's the other thing is, like, if the world building is bad, then I think almost automatically it should have just been a movie, because like, the thing, I think, I'm not alone in this. The thing that was exciting about Star Wars TV shows being made was that, like the animated shows, they could bring a greater depth of lore. They could make the Star Wars universe more alive in a way that movies hinted at, and especially, the original, and to some degree the prequel trilogies, were pointing towards a greater world, which is why, the extended universe existed and got done so thoroughly. Every character has a name, every character could be invented into something new, and these TV shows are a great opportunity to explore that. But it sounds like, again, instead of exploring it, they're trying to reinvent it, and then you get into a lot of problems when you try to reinvent things, as, again, the sequel trilogy kind of showed. If you try to reinvent yourself every movie, then you just end up confusing people and getting everybody upset.
The slower pacing is better here than it was in the Book of Boba Fett. Like, there's a section of the story where he's on the run with this child who is being hunted by the Empire, and so there's like, I can think of one moment. I think it's in like the third episode where they're kind of walking through like almost like a desert, not a desert because it's not Tatooine, but they're like walking through like the woods in this random planet, and there's this tension that kind of comes from, like, it's quiet and you don't know if someone's going to come out and get them at any moment.
Yeah, and Book of Boba Fett, again, I think we talked about it, but like, it wasn't that bad until they decided to slot 2 episodes of season 3 of The Mandalorian in it.
That doesn't happen here. This is very much,
yeah. Well, that's good. At least
they definitely
do
do not, like, this makes no other real connections to.
Actually, maybe that's
Star
not
Wars
the best,
shows.
because if it makes no connection whatsoever, that's also a problem.
I mean, it's kind of nice because, like, obviously this is more directly related to the prequel trilogy, obviously, and then trying to tie things into the original trilogy, like just the presence of Darth Vader in the original suit.
Yeah,
makes it easy to connect it to the original series, and then you have
and that can be nice, but that you also do tend to hit, like, kind of. I remember when Episode 3 came out, and everybody was like, okay, well, or rather, when Episode 2 came out, right, when Attack of the Clones came out, and then everybody's like, wow, how are they going to get from that to Episode 4 in one movie?
And the answer was make a show years later that fills in the gaps.
Yeah, I mean, that was the answer, but, like, that wasn't an obvious answer, right? It took a little while for that to come to a head.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about this show, of all the Star Wars Disney Plus shows, it had the highest premiere, like the highest number of households tuned in to watch the first 2 episodes when they came out at the end of May, and then it also had the highest number of people watching the final episode. And people online are speculating that this is a cause for concern, because what's the lesson that Disney is going to learn from this is that what do people want to see? If they want to see classic Star Wars characters come back, and that's what we need to make content of, and not explore like new characters, new stories.
Yeah, I mean, probably, but at the same time, yeah, it's where it's hard to be discerning, right, as a fan on what you want to support, because people did want to see Obi-Wan Kenobi specifically. He is one of the most popular characters in the entire Star Wars canon, and people were probably very excited to see Darth Vader. So there was a lot of hype around the show. It was kind of inevitable that it would do well, even if it wasn't at the level of quality that people wanted it to be. And I think they also did not reveal a whole lot, right? Like, there wasn't a lot of information before the show aired, which I think was done partially on purpose to not lessen the hype, because I think, people are starting to learn lessons from things like The Ring of Power, where they revealed a whole lot before the show and all the fans hated it, and then it became a big problem, right? Whereas Obi-Wan kind of didn't give up a lot, and I think most of the fans started nitpicking afterwards, but they had to watch it to nitpick it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
And it is probably concerning, but to me, it is and it isn't. Like, I feel like, especially under the leadership of Disney, Star Wars is just going to become like the MCU, oversaturated, and I'm going to stop caring about it. And that's sad in some way, but I'm still going to care about the parts of it that I liked, right? Like, I am in the slow process of watching through the Clone Wars, the animated show, and I will still love the first Clone Wars animated show, and I still enjoy watching the original and the prequels trilogy for what they are. And, at some level, you do get to decide what you accept as canon and what you don't, or what you consume as media again and what you don't. I think the problem is more with the lack of physical media makes it harder to gauge those things, because I feel like if we were talking about, traditionally, there was viewership, and then that is one thing, but then afterwards you also had DVD sales afterwards that would dictate how well a show was done. And some shows, got saved by the DVD sales, because people were like, oh, nobody watched this when it aired, but it is selling like crazy, and so we're going to reboot it. So, having lost that gauge, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm sure they can still check the traffic on different Star Wars properties and eventually analyze it to see which ones are doing better, but I think it's just where the industry is at, and you kind of have to accept it and, be thankful for the good things that come out and take them well, and, do these things. Do those podcasts, YouTube videos, dissecting things, showing what we think is wrong, because, the people in charge do still notice it, right? And maybe, having this discussion in an open space, even though we are two friends discussing a series, having that is probably a more powerful thing than trying to limit the amount of content you are consuming for the sake of creating an artificial change in what it is. And it also means, because, again, if you don't have information, then you have to rely on other people watching it and their opinion before you make up your own opinion, and that's not necessarily a good idea either.
Another example of where this show kind of missed the mark a bit for me is with the music. The actual music in the show, it's not bad music. The music is good, but they intentionally avoid using most of the classic Star Wars themes for most of the show, and it did feel odd. There's moments where Darth Vader is walking off of his ship, or the Empire, you see the Empire doing things, and they don't play the Imperial March. They come up with like a new musical score that's like meant to evoke a similar feeling.
But do they change it, like, for emphasis? Sometimes they'll have it, because it could have just been that they were trying to, like, not use it so that when they do, people get excited, which I think is a bad idea, but, like, it's a hit and miss.
The composer of the series, Natalie Holt, intentionally, they talked about like avoiding using the the classic Star Wars themes, so that when they did pull them out, it was more meaningful. And I actually think that when they finally do bring out the Imperial March, it actually represents like a character shift for Darth Vader. And I don't want to get into it here because it's a spoiler, but when they finally do use the Imperial March, you can see that something has changed in his thought process that shows that, okay, I am now not the same person I was like 30 seconds ago. And now it's like as if my theme song can finally be itself. But, you know, like another example, like the track Battle of the Heroes, which was written for Revenge of the Sith. You know, there's a couple times in this show, Darth Vader and Obi-Wan fight. You would think that would be the music to play during those fights, or even Duel of the Fates. But they, again, like neither track is used. And I've seen people fan edit like that musical score into those fights.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen it, so it's hard to judge. But it is a hard one to try to balance, because I do know that, like, you know, they did do that for, you know, in Revenge of the Sith. And actually throughout this sequel, the prequel trilogy, they did pepper in the Imperial, like, you know, 2 bars of the Imperial March, or, you know, at critical moments around the character development of Anakin and Palpatine. And I think it can work, but it is also, you know, the problem is then you're asking this composer to basically mimic one of the most iconic movie soundtrack to make it sound like that's what it is, and then add other things in. That's, I mean, it would be a tall order to ask of anybody. So
it was especially jarring, like having watched Star Wars Rebels and Clone Wars. Like they have no problem using like the classic theme songs, you know.
Yeah.
So,
well, probably because most of their budget went on animation. They weren't going to compose original songs.
Yeah. So I'm torn because like the music wasn't bad. I guess I just, as a fan, was looking to hear more of the music. That it's like, this seems like this would be the perfect spot to like play, you know, that song. It doesn't have to be like performed the exact same way it was before, like
yeah,
a different
but
version of it or something.
Yeah, a variation of it rather than a similar song.
I'm looking at the time. I realize we've actually somehow managed to fill almost an hour without even getting into spoilers. So I think we'll actually we'll save spoiler talk until after you've watched the show, because
Oh, okay. I mean, I could power through it in a week, I'm pretty sure.
well, I mean, Thor has
the
new Thor has also just come out, so I don't know if you want to put a pause on Obi-Wan to make space for Thor.
That is a very tempting proposition.
Because that would also give you more time to watch Obi-Wan.
Yeah, no, that's probably a good idea.
All right. So I'll say, I think Obi-Wan Kenobi has a really strong start with the first episode. I think it has an incredible finish with the last episode. Like, the last episode gave me everything I would have wanted. And then everything in the middle, it just doesn't, I don't have the same esteem for.
Well, that probably also explains the why it had very high viewership at the beginning and end.
Yes, yeah. So Obi-Wan Kenobi is now streaming on Disney Plus. If you haven't watched the show yet, like Beef Pork Ribs, and perhaps you're more interested now because of our conversation today, you can go watch it on Disney Plus. And then next week we will be talking about Thor: Love and Thunder. And then we'll come back the week after that to talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi spoilers. And then 2 weeks ago, when Tater Tot was on the show with me, she wanted to pull something out of the bat jar. And so we pulled out Scooby-Doo. So Scooby-Doo will then be the episode like after that.
Like all of Scooby-Doo?
Yeah, like the Scooby-Doo franchise.
Oh, that's going to be fun. I don't know if you know this, but I have been a huge Scooby-Doo fan.
I do recall that from our Scoob episode.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was awful. All right. More on why that was awful in a couple of weeks.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
And then Ms. Marvel finishes at some point, and then there's DC League of Super Pets.
Ooh, I am not promising that I will watch Ms. Marvel.
What about DC League of Super Pets?
No, I don't know if I will. I will come in happy to be spoiled if I don't watch those ones, but we'll see.
It's got The Rock and Kevin Hart. What more could you possibly ask for?
See, if you say it's got Kevin Hart and The Rock, that works better because, like, The Rock isn't a huge draw for me, and Kevin Hart definitely isn't, but then Kevin Hart with The Rock is okay.
Okay, what about the fact that it has Keanu Reeves as Batman?
Yeah, no, you're right. I might have to at least give it a try.
And John Krasinski as Superman.
Nah, that's not in the same
Oh no,
league
I've lost
as
you
those other
again.
ones.
Okay, just focus on Keanu Reeves as Batman.
Yeah, we'll focus on Keanu Reeves as Batman.
So come back to the Batshar podcast next week when we talk about Thor, Love and Thunder, which I still don't think is a great title. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
So we're all, mate.